Welcome to Coastal Front. Join us each week as we sit down with the movers and shakers of Vancouver to discuss stories of business, politics, accomplishment, and failure. Our aim is to keep you dialed into what matters most in our city. Now, here's your host, Andrew Johns.
Well, Prem Gill from CreativeBC, thanks for coming into our show today.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me, Andrew. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited because I had never, as I mentioned to you a few minutes ago, I'd never even really heard of CreativeBC until Ross told me you were coming in. We did a little bit of research, and I started exploring your website. And man, you guys you've got touch points in pretty much everything related to like creative artistry in the province, whether it's like music or film is obviously a huge part of this. So maybe you could start for our listeners and kind of just giving an overview of like, what is CreativeBC?
Yeah, absolutely. CreativeBC is an organization that was formed in 2013, but it was an organization that was an amalgamation of a few other organizations. So it's actually been around for over 20 years.
Okay.
Formerly, it was called BC Film and Media. And it was really developed to support the economic development of BC's creative industries, and initially just focused on BC's motion picture industry. And that really sort of aligned with the time when it was growing in North America and Hollywood North was becoming a thing. Yes. And there was more production, both domestic production and foreign production starting to grow in Canada. And certainly British Columbia was always a hub for it. And so it's an organization where we actually receive a grant from the province and we have a mandate from the provincial government, although we're a nonprofit society that is at arm's length from the government. But our mandate is to serve the government and the public in supporting the creative industries with a specific focus on the motion picture sector, which includes film, television, visual effects, animation, the video game, interactive sector, books and magazines, and music.
Okay. Wow, that's a lot of sectors.
Yeah, and across that, it's running grant programs and supporting policy work and a number of things.
Okay. So you mentioned that you're a nonprofit society, but all of your funding comes from the province of BC, 100% or near that? Or?
Yeah, pretty close. We have some administrative revenue that comes in from processing tax credits. We manage the tax credit programs for the province as well. So the motion picture industry, really globally, there's tax incentive programs all over the world, and BC has very competitive programs, which has really been a large part of the growth here, has certainly been the incentives that the province offers. So those are administered through CreativeBC, and we have a small but mighty team that supports, it's a 6.2, we are overall, the creative industries are about a $6.4 billion GDP to the province, but the film and television sector within that's about $3.2 billion. So it's a substantial part of the creative economy, but also the province's economy. And the motion picture sector, there's over 40,000 people who work in it. There's another 5,000 to 10,000 who work in visual effects and animation.
Wow.
And that doesn't include the indirect jobs that are related to the sector. So it's a pretty dynamic part of the community here in British Columbia.
And are most of those, I'm assuming most of that production is largely in the Lower Mainland?
It is in Metro Vancouver. There are production hubs in, like Vancouver Island has really become a hub. Yeah. There was a recent series called C that was on Apple TV as part of their launch.
Oh, wow.
With starring Jason Momoa.
C-E-A?
C as in C-E-E. Like
C, like to see visual C. Okay,
there's a sight thing involved. So if you haven't seen it, you should use your 7-day trial on Apple TV and check it out. So Vancouver Island, Victoria, North Island, as well as Kelowna, the interior. Yeah. Often we have great locations all across the province. So we, people like to come here because they can have both deserts and forests and beaches and urban. We've got it all.
Yeah. Wow. That's really neat. Now, if I go back, and this is, how long have you been the CEO for CreativeBC?
Just over 4 years.
Just over 4 years? Okay. So this is obviously before your time, but I'm not going to age myself or date myself a little bit here, but I remember back when the only production pretty much in Vancouver was 21 Jump Street. Remember that show?
I do remember that show, yes.
With Johnny Depp?
Yes.
And so I recall there was a time at which, Hollywood North was really starting to grow. It's kind of like I would think it was maybe like late 90s, early 2000s, if my memory is correct. But then there was a period that had a bit of a lull because apparently the province pulled or got rid of its tax incentive program. And a lot of people in the industry were saying, you know, you're killing our industry. This business is going to go back to the States. And so then eventually at some point, some administrative government, I don't know whether it was under the NDP or the Liberals at the time, brought that back. Can you walk us through a little bit of history there?
It was before my time, but the incentives have always been there. There was a time when there was a slump when the dollar was on par. You know, there's many factors. So there's the currency, the infrastructure, the number of crews that we have, and our proximity to Los Angeles and tax incentives. It's all a magical combination of things. Right. And there's certainly been ups and downs, and, you know, who knows what the future holds. But this is also now such a global industry. There's so many jurisdictions that weren't in the business before, so it has become more competitive. But what we have here in BC, and certainly in Metro Vancouver, is that we've been in the industry over 30 years. Right. We have really experienced and talented people here who are doing the level of production of, you know, HBO, Netflix level productions. So it's often a first choice, or first, if you're not producing a program out of Los Angeles or New York, it's usually Vancouver or Toronto that you're looking at. Right. But we also have, you know, a very dynamic domestic industry of people telling stories in Canada as well, that we are always trying to. That's a large part of our mandate, is that we serve everybody across the sector, and the foreign service industry has been fantastic to help grow our talent base and experience. And they're always looking, how can we also support more Canadian content and the diversity of stories that people here have to tell.
And is that part of your mandate? Like, I know with the CRT, I think it's the CRTC, there's a certain amount of requirements. Like if you were a public broadcaster and then in radio, you have to play a certain amount of Canadian content. Yeah. But you're not funded by the federal government, you're funded by the BC government. Is there any kind of requirements around supporting BC artists?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's really the core, the heart and soul of what we do is supporting BC talent. So even, you know, our tax credit programs are large. They're all focused on residents in BC. That's how you can benefit. If you want to leverage those programs, you have to hire British Columbians. So what are the thresholds?
I mean, this is really interesting for me, Prem, because in the world I work in the financial services industry, there's a whole area in mining and oil and gas referred to as flow through. And I remember when I first got into this industry, there was a short window of time where there were these flow-through equivalents in the film industry where you as an investor, individual investor, could put money into a project that was going to be built it was going to support the film industry, and you got tax credits for it. Yeah. So do you mind taking a minute to dive a little bit more into
I can tell you a little bit about it. So, you know, the tax incentives are really a percentage of a salary for qualifying labor for a British Columbia resident. You basically can recoup that through the CRA once you file your taxes. CreativeBC is the organization that will certify your production. So that if you say, you know, $5,000 of these wages are British Columbia residents who qualify within the qualifying labor, the types of jobs, then you would get that percentage back at the end of your tax filing. Oh, I see. So that's very simplified, you know, way to. I know you have more in-depth financial. No,
I like layman's. That's
basically the description. But all this to say, it all kind of ties back together on supporting the talent and the development here, to creating, you know, long-term jobs and careers. And it's certainly on the domestic side of the industry as well. There's a lot of crossover in terms of, you asked about federal. Well, we look to invest provincial dollars to leverage federal dollars. So we work very closely with our colleagues at Telefilm Canada, the Canada Media Fund. The Canadian broadcasters are triggers for productions to happen. Domestically, we have a local show or a Canadian show for Global that will be starting production shortly here in BC called Family Law, done by a local production company called Lark Productions. And they did a show previously called Motive. So it's a very dynamic industry. It's changing almost on a daily basis because the global demand for content seems to be insatiable. We now have productions that are producing for Netflix and Amazon and Apple and Facebook, and they've all been in BC.
Facebook's getting the game.
Quibi, you know, all of these new platforms, and they're all, you know, looking to really use the talent in British Columbia to help create content for them.
Okay. So going to these tax credits, are they related only specifically to wages, or
yes.
they're? Oh, okay.
Yeah. So in other provinces, it's different.
Okay.
But the provincial credit and the federal credit for British Columbia mirror each other. In some provinces, it's an all-in credit. So that means anything you spend, all spend. But I think the BC credit is very clean and straightforward and focused on job creation. Yeah. And ultimately, those people, live, work, and play here, and their families grow, and all of that kind of stuff. So it's very easy also internationally to kind of help people understand that there's usually no gray lines. It's a person who is a resident, and a portion of their labor their salary qualifies for a credit.
And what would be like if I was, say, for example, if I was a furniture manufacturer in BC and I was selling direct to consumers and I wanted to do a TV ad and I wanted to hire a local actor, like would that be an example of, or what is it? What qualifies this labor?
Well, commercials actually don't qualify.
Okay, no,
so that's very clear. Yeah. But a production like Riverdale, they shoot all over British Columbia. So it's the crew that works on Riverdale. So it's the carpenter that works on the set, not the material that the carpentry department purchased from the local supplier. Yeah. In some provinces, some of that would count. Right. But in BC, it's strictly focused on, your set decorators, hairdressers, grips, camera operators, directors,
and so it has to be for production of something related to like entertainment type, or it could be a documentary. Like
if it's going onto a qualified platform, right? So it would be a broadcaster, or it's being distributed theatrically. It's a feature film. Yeah. So it's not just, so there are which is why we have analysts who certify your productions, because otherwise, you would get rejected likely if you didn't go through that process. Yeah. Well, you have to go through that process in order to even apply for it.
Well, this is good because this actually leads into one of the questions I'm going to ask you a little bit later about like the vetting process and like, because how big's your operating budget at CreativeBC?
Our grant from the province is just about 3.2 million. Okay. So it's, we do a lot with what we have, and then
that's pretty small, isn't it? I mean, 3.2 million. That's because I saw your list of like all these people work for you, and you managed to do that on a payroll of like, or not even payroll. There's like where's that list here? Is this your team here?
That's the team. Yeah. So we have. I mean, it's we have other programs, grant programs that we run. We have a music fund that's separate from that.
Oh, I see.
We also, as I mentioned, we have recovery costs for administrating some programs. Okay. So that's outside of that. But I mean, it's amazing what you can get done. And we're really focused on collaboration, right? We work a lot with industry associations and member associations and colleagues across other provinces and territories to really leverage what we have against other dollars. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Ross, why don't we pull up that team while we're talking to Prem here, and we talk a little bit more about, what different people do. And so within CreativeBC, you've got, so the industry includes film, like TV and short films and
web series
and feature films. And
exactly.
So there's like, I call it, I'm gonna now dumb this down. So you got like the TV world. Yeah. And then you have like the musical world, right? Which could be like from punk rock bands to like cello players. And then is there some other areas too?
Yeah, well, many of the roles
the video games
crossover.
Right?
Yeah, so many of the roles. So we have a team that just is focused on tax credit administration. Okay. So that's about 5-6 people. And then we have a team that's focused on administering our music fund, which is called Amplify BC. Yes. And it's 7.5 million for this fiscal year. Right. So that's a team of about another 4 or so people who administer 4 different grant programs. And they range, as you said, they support artists, they support company development, they also support live music related things, so a variety of programs. And then we have a team that is the Provincial Film Commission, which is an integral part of the film and television industry and why we thrive here and we've been so strong. So when you have such a robust jurisdiction, it comes with a lot of challenges and busyness. So when a production lands in British Columbia, because we're such a mature jurisdiction, we have people, there's people who are location managers who help productions kind of find a studio space or, put a crew together, and there's various aspects. But often there's a new production or they're not ready to talk to the industry yet. So they'll call CreativeBC and ask us to read their script and give them a breakdown of potential locations. Or if there's a studio coming online, you know, let's say 6 months from now when they're ready for production. And this is for both foreign and domestic productions.
I see.
So we put together locations packages, but also kind of keep our eyes on, we have over 2 million square feet of studio space in the province. So we keep our eyes on what's coming up, what's available, what studio has, you know, if there's a large Netflix production, when is there a downtime so we could get another production in there potentially?
So you're acting like an industry advocate and liaison in a sense.
Yeah. I mean, it's really, we like to see ourselves as a catalyst between industry and government, right? So part of our mandate from government is to run the Film Commission services, which are a free service.
That's on your website too, right? I think.
Yeah, exactly.
There, Ross.
And and we also work in a lot of policy work with colleagues in all levels of government that are related to, well, like Cadillac Fairview, where you're located in here. They would be, I know we've worked with them on, you know, often someone may want to shoot in your lobby or in your office space. So what's the policy that Cadillac Fairview has to work with the film industry? So often we'll work both with governments, but also non-government organizations on how do you develop a policy that, if you want to work with this industry, serves the industry well, but also has a benefit to your organization.
Right.
And then also working with all the municipalities, you know, between Whistler and Hope. And then we also support 8 different regional film commissions across the province. So in the
that's what I wanted to bring up here, Ross, because I saw that. Where would we find that on your website here? It's under, do you know?
Right there, Provincial Film Commission.
Yeah.
And
I just, maybe you can search for it, Ross. Just let us know if you find it. But I didn't realize we have these film commissions, and there's one up north.
Yes.
I forget where it was in Dawson.
Yes, there's one in there's one in Prince George.
Yeah,
in
Prince
northern
George,
BC, and there's also in the Quesnel region.
Yeah.
And you know, they obviously their level of activity isn't as huge up there, but certainly often they work. They're sometimes like in northern BC, they're also the tourism office for northern BC. So they kind of do a bit of both. So they'll do that locations work and support in market. So if we have, the guy's name is Clint in Prince George, like Clint, there's a production that's interested in something very specific. We think you have it in your region. They're going to come up, you know, you can give them a tour. And sometimes productions will contact those people directly, but they're also working with, you know, their municipalities and universities or whatever it is, or Crown lands, First Nations lands on, you know, the same kind of policy work.
Yeah.
Around working with this industry. So it's much more in order, you know, I know everybody you see the production shutting down your street, or you walk out of your office and you have to go around the other way. And it can be disruptive. So that's a big part of what our film commission work is really working with the communities and the industry to ensure that you're leaving a good footprint when you leave, and that the experience of the community around you is great. So you have community ambassadors, especially if you're shooting in neighborhoods like the downtown east side. Like everybody is very sensitive to the reality of life around there for people. So how do you ensure that you're not disruptive or disrespectful and all of these things? So there's actually a lot of that stuff going on behind the scenes. And again, it comes with, we are part of the discussion, but it really, you know, the industry, the unions, the guilds, the major studios, everybody's really working together on this stuff on a constant basis.
Man, you got a big plate of like, you had a lot on your plate.
It's all those smart people that work there that do a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, incredible. So you remember that movie Vanilla Sky? Do you remember that movie with
Tom Cruise?
With Tom Cruise.
Penelope Cruz.
That's right. And at the beginning of the film, I remember seeing him in an interview, and he said that this was one of his most meaningful scenes he ever shot was when he was at the very beginning of the film, and he was driving in his car, and he gets to Times Square, and there's nobody around. And they actually filmed, like, this was, definitely before all the CGI and whatnot. And so they filmed him darting across the center streets of Times Square with not a soul in sight. And so they for that production, apparently that was their most expensive scene in that entire production, of course. And there was some really, I don't remember the number was, but it was an astronomical cost. People shut down all that area and get all the people away so they could film it as though there was nobody in Times Square. I also saw when they were doing, what's that superhero fellow that's Ryan Reynolds?
Deadpool, yeah.
Deadpool, right? Yeah. To even hesitate, I'm probably going to get shot now. So they were filming something.
Yeah, they're doing a lot around here,
right?
Yeah.
So they have police and everything. Who pays for all that stuff?
Well, it's a combination of the productions and, working with the city and negotiating with the city. And
does the city get it? Like, would the city get anything from that?
Yeah, they pay for permits. So they need to pay. You can't just show up on a street and shoot. So you have to work with the city and get permits, and that comes at a cost.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of, in the city of Vancouver proper and many of the surrounding municipalities, but here we have a lot of really great people working in the film office at the city who we're in contact with constantly, who are delivering the permits and also really working with all levels of productions to ensure that they have access, but also looking out for the citizens of Vancouver so that that if they're going to close down a certain park or corner for a weekend, let's say, that the citizens are informed and it's not a surprise, so that you're not just constantly annoyed at this industry, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of work that they're doing. We have, I think the current mayor and council are very positive and supportive on the sector. And Vancouver proper is the heart and soul of the industry, but it expands out to, we have, large studios in Langley now and Maple Ridge. And Once Upon a Time was a series that shot a lot in Steveston. So there's, we're just known as a place that part of our job is to ensure that, if you're coming here, you're making your production in British Columbia, that you have a great experience end to end, but also understand the guidelines and regulations that you're working within, because that can be, challenging. And
is there a set of is there a set of rules or regulations that, there's, does the province have
the province has a film policy, and that we're working right now with all various departments that are touched by this industry.
Available?
It is, but it's in development right now. So I think there is something on our
it never
website
existed
currently.
Before? This is something
No,
new,
it's actually existed for a long time.
Oh, I see.
But it's a pretty lightweight, but really because the industry wasn't as large as it is now.
Yeah.
So it's working with, agriculture, transport, highways, and different ministries on how, obviously they've got really other major things that they deal with, not just this industry, right?
Yeah.
So if somebody wants to close off a portion of a highway, how do they approach it? What's the lead time they need? And, same with the Times Square, example, like it can't just happen overnight. So, I mean, there's a lot of very sophisticated productions and producers out there in the studios and producers here in BC who know and understand that industry. So that's sometimes people ask, like, what does a producer do? And that's it's getting all of that stuff sorted and having the team that helps.
Yeah, a lot of people don't
it.
even know the difference between a producer and a director.
Yeah, and you don't need to, right? You just want to go and have a great experience watching a film or a TV show.
What would you describe? I mean,
the producer is literally producing the show, bringing all the elements. Sometimes it's financing, or it's hiring the crew, and it's, keeping things on budget and on track. And the director is focused on the creative and just, helping to tell the story behind the camera. So that's really, we call them. I guess
the best sort of sports analogy would be like the producer's like the general manager and the director's like the coach.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay.
You can use that. Yeah.
So you mentioned the total production like for arts production in BC is 6.2 billion.
Yeah, well those
production.
are within the creative industries that are under CreativeBC's umbrella. So
and then half of that is film.
A lot of it, yes.
Wow.
A big chunk of it. But, the creative and cultural industries expand far beyond what our mandate is. This doesn't include performing arts or architecture or photography or design. We have, like, the Push Festival starts next week, and it's a, large festival about performing arts. That doesn't come within type of stuff doesn't fall under our umbrella.
Oh, it doesn't? Okay, yeah. And going back to this, I just forgot to ask this question earlier. What is the tax credit for someone who's doing production in there?
Well, it depends what you're doing, and they're sort of different. So there's a production services tax credit that a lot of foreign productions access. There is a tax credit specifically for BC productions, and there's a visual effects and animation credit. So it's different percentages, which is far easier to look at on a website than
Is that publicly available?
Yeah, it's all on our website. I mean, it's all public information. And if there's anybody who's, looking to learn more, if the information isn't on the website, there's lots of great people who can help answer those questions.
Right, yeah. So if I hired Ryan Reynolds, because he's from BC, and I paid him $1 million to be in a little video of mine that's not a commercial, would he qualify for tax credits?
Well, if it's on a service, like if you're doing it for Netflix and you have a budget from Netflix, and Ryan is a Canadian citizen, so there's a certain percentage, but it's not that simple. It's not just and if you have $1 million to play Ryan Reynolds, make a great Canadian feature film. That would be a great investment if you're looking for somewhere to invest.
I'm just wondering if one of the reasons. I mean, I'm just being a little bit. Tongue in cheek here, but did Deadpool was part of their motivation of filming here because he's Canadian?
Well, I don't think it was just Ryan's salary that was probably a consideration. I think it was a lot of the other crew, and he's from here. Maybe he wanted to be home for a while and make a show here. Yeah,
they're pretty good movies. So do you get a little bit of insight on what's coming before any of us common folk know?
Well, we kind of have a sense of knowing what productions are scoping and but obviously that's all confidential.
Of course it is. I'm not gonna
but there's a lot of people on Twitter and places that are tracking a lot of productions and I think what's great about another reason who are people who are celebrities like to come up here is that they kind of can do their stuff and they can either go back to Los Angeles or wherever they're from on Friday night, or if they're sticking around town, people kind of just ignore them, right? Nobody's
polite Canadians just leave them alone.
I mean, there's not a lot of and we don't have not everybody's not going to the same restaurant like you would in some other city or somewhere else, or maybe they are. I'm not part of it, but but I think it's just a very positive experience. And Vancouver is a great city. It has a lot of dynamic things going on, so that when you are here and you have your downtime, there's things to do. And I think that's part of, that kind of creative class. I don't know if anybody ever talks about that anymore. The, old Richard Florida kind of concepts of what makes a creative economy thrive is all the other things as well. And the accessibility to, we have a great food culture in this city.
Right.
It's exciting potential of a new art gallery location, or even having something like the Cindy Sherman exhibit right now. That's really fantastic for Vancouver to have a contemporary artist like that, in my view.
Yeah.
And all these festivals and just, it's got a vibrant urban life that some people are interested in. Or if you're not, you can go up to Grouse Mountain later and, go down the hill.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we are pretty fortunate. That's for sure. So when it comes to these pillars, let's talk about this for a moment. So you have the strategic pillar number 1 is competitiveness. Second is growth mindset. Third is discoverability. And fourth is talent. Did you help write this?
Yeah. So that was along with, a group of about 80 people. When I first started my role, we brought in stakeholders, both our staff, our board, government, people at all levels, and industry stakeholders on what is the goal of this organization. And all of those things you described are really elements of, through our programs, whether they're the tax incentives, the work we do at the Film Commission, grant programs, our policy work, that they're all thriving to keep British Columbia and the creative industries domestically, nationally, and globally competitive, continue to focus on how do we continue to develop our talent, what's needed to keep that talent competitive in the world, and then helping people get to markets around the world so that they can talk about what they're doing, sell their content, grow their companies. So it's all within that economic development lens. And how do the programs and things that we do in our organization really help that thrive?
Okay. That's helpful. Thank you. So when on this is your impact report, and I see here, this is your production services tax credit. Is that related to?
That's the tax. Yes. That's the big tax
and I see
credit,
the breakdown here, feature film, $147 million, miniseries, $750,000. The big one is TV series, $320,000, and then total projected tax credits of $524 million and it shows BC budget of 2.8 billion. So does that mean that you guys are expecting $2.8 billion of production
expenditures.
Production expenditures.
Exactly.
And then from that will be issued $524 million of tax credits. You know, one of the topics that has been was up during the federal election, the I know Jagmeet Singh was speaking about, was the fact that you've got these digital companies like Netflix and Amazon that are they're content producers now, and they're not paying their fair share of taxes in Canada. Now and it sounds like these are some of the companies that are also getting these tax credits. Do you guys have any kind of data that you keep to show like where these tax credits in the end I would assume there's a return on this investment, because ultimately this is.
Yeah, I mean,
do you understand where I'm going with this question?
Yeah.
Like, ultimately, this is taxpayers' money that's being handed over to companies like Apple and Netflix to do their production, and then they're producing it, sending it back to Canada. Subscribers are paying for it, but they're not paying any tax on that revenue either. So I think it's a fairly valid argument. So do you have any kind of data to kind of support?
Well, we there's two calendars we work on, which is our fiscal year ends March 31st. And then there's, the estimated production within a year. A production has up to 36 months to file for a tax credit. So it's never a true in-year picture.
Right.
But it's both the direct and indirect. So because these are, all of those dollars and those tax credits are going towards employing British Columbians, right? Yeah. So when we have such a large labor base, it really is the biggest, and those people are then paying their taxes, paying income tax and living here and doing all that. So that's so to be clear, that $524 million of tax credits, because as you pointed out earlier, is just for labor. Yes. And so those are people that are getting a T4 and they're paying tax on that money. Exactly. And I know you said that it varies based on that, because on your website you have but can you give a rough estimate of like what's the high and the low of what these tax credits can look like? Well, if it's in percentage terms. It's the production services tax credit is 28%. So 28% of your, let's say you have a $60,000 salary, 28% of that can be recouped through the tax credit. I see. So that's basically how it kind of works. But it is, this is a debate that goes on in, this industry around the world is incentives are part of the equation. So, jurisdictions that have a lot of production activity. Like New York does it, LA does it. New York does it. Los Angeles is different a little bit. They do have a program, but it's very different because the industry it's their industry. Ontario is very competitive. Quebec, productions when they're making decisions on where they're going. And also, the support of those domestic productions becomes more and more important. Okay. I'm just running the math. You have your calculator. I'm like, oh God. I'm not going to hold you to this. I'm just trying to get, No. I'm just trying to get I'm just trying to get an idea. So, but it makes sense that of this 525. So for those people who might like myself look at this with a bit of a skeptical view, I think you made a really good point here, Prem, which is that of that $524 million, that's basically handed back to these big corporations, and not all big corporations, but largely that are getting these tax credits. Keep in mind that that's money that is actually it's associated with people who are actually getting, like, they can basically afford to buy more labor. Yes, so to speak. Exactly. Right. Like exactly. They can, and that's why we like to say we're a soup to nuts jurisdiction, where you can do all aspects of your production. Right. You can suits to nuts. You can hire your. You can do your visual effects, you can do your post-production, you can do your editing here, you can do your actual production, you can hire actors, you can hire local directors, right? Like there's a lot of... And do you have any data to show that because you have an incentive, or because there's a tax credit associated with hiring local labor, that a production company won't necessarily go and try and, short of like the big names out there that are part of the feature film, but like they'll go and find local actors versus recruiting people from LA because they can get those tax credits? Yeah, in some cases, especially for sometimes maybe not the lead roles, but there's a lot of other roles in a production.
Yeah.
It's really, if they're not doing that, then they're not necessarily doing it for the incentive programs. It's because they're making a creative decision because they want to be, in a location like Squamish or somewhere.
Yeah.
If you look at like HBO productions, for the large part, from what I've seen, they make decisions not just on this part. It depends who you talk to in an organization, right? Whether, in a Disney or whatever, there's different departments who are part of the decision making on where production will go.
Yeah.
And then it's also the availability of studio space. And do you have the experienced crew? And that's what I always come back to, is these things are all a big part of the equation. But if we didn't have the talent here who could deliver on it, they wouldn't be doing stuff here, because you have to have, I've been to sets for shows like Riverdale and The Flash and Sabrina most recently, and there's such, like, even the set decorating to the years and years of experience of the crews. It takes a lot of people. And I think that's what you sometimes forget, is that it's a very labor intensive industry. There's still a lot of people involved in all of these jobs. There's not AI hasn't really come into it yet in most of the roles.
Yeah.
And on visual effects and animation, we were speaking earlier about Into the Spider-Verse, which was, won an Oscar for Best Animated Feature Film, and it was made down the street from you here at Sony ImageWorks. Like, the bulk of the artists who worked on that were here.
Wow.
So that can't be underestimated, the impact of that.
I know Ross is bringing it up right now. So Into the Spider-Verse, for those, so you've seen it, right?
Yes.
And Ross, were you saying you've seen it as well, or?
Yeah, I've seen it twice. I absolutely love it.
Oh, twice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a great story.
When did this come? This is the one that Dave has been talking about. He said it's his favorite, favorite Batman, or sorry,
and
superhero.
Spider-Man.
And the soundtrack is unbelievable.
This is the one with Post Malone's got that family. Yeah.
Exactly. And
that's like built into the, like, there's a couple parts where he's like singing, and he's like an awkward teenager, and it's really funny.
Yeah. Well, I was saying to Ross that I popped into the Meinhardt's grocery store next to you on my way in here, and I overheard two people talking about, a visual effects industry social that they were going to. Like, I don't know who they are. I was eavesdropping, but that's, it's all over. Like, everybody knows someone who works in this sector, and that's a lot of people. Yeah. It's pretty great.
Our daughter has, she goes to school, she's in grade 1. One of her classmates, her parents do a ton, like, their whole industry. They've got a company that they do a set production. And I guess they're quite veterans in this business, because they're one of the ones that would be doing these big movies. And every year they go all out for Halloween.
Oh, that must be a fun house.
And apparently their Halloween house is like people come from all over the place to go check out their house. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
And those are the kind of things that as an example, a lot of those shows that I mentioned earlier, they have a lot of vintage elements to them in terms of their set decoration. So a lot of, they shoot out in Langley. Well, the Langley secondhand stores and vintage shops actually do a lot of business with those productions, even though they don't qualify for the tax credit or whatever it is, or the dry cleaners that are, taking care of the wardrobe needs.
Yeah, sure.
So it's, when you really start to think about sort of where the materials are purchased, all of those kinds of things to build a set.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on.
All the ancillary businesses that benefit from the industry.
Exactly.
What's the most, I don't know if you know the answer to this, but what's the biggest production that's ever been done in your knowledge here in the province or in Vancouver?
I don't know. There's a few. There was a Netflix show, and I think they're doing another season. I don't know, but it's called Altered Carbon, and they built it's a big set in a studio in Surrey. Yeah. And that was quite massive, both from the actual set and the production itself to the visual effects and animation, or the visual effects and special effects that were part of the show.
Is that the show where, like, you die, but then you're reincarnated into another person's body type?
Yeah, in sort of futuristic San Francisco. Yeah, so if that's your jam, that's the kind of show you might want to watch. But there's sort of, what's interesting is sort of we had The Flash, and then we have Arrow, and we have Spider or Supergirl, and we have, Legends, and they're all, and now there's Batwoman, and they're all crossing over. and those are all Warner Brothers productions. So they're all interrelated, and a lot of people work on these crossover episodes and different things. So I think of that. It's not one show, but it's a pretty substantial part of the industry here, which is really kind of interesting. And then there's really, great films like BC writer-director named Mina Shum did a film last year called Meditation Park, or 2 years ago.
Okay.
And her first film, which she did over 20 years ago now, was one of the first things Sandra Oh ever did. And it's not a large production, but it has a lot of impact. And Sandra came back.
What was it, Prem, what was the name of this?
Meditation Park.
Park. Okay.
Mina and Sandra have a long-term relationship. So Sandra came back and had a role in that film just before Killing Eve started, right? So it's kind of interesting how, again, it's not about necessarily the size and scale, but sometimes the impact.
Right.
There's a film called The Body Remembers When the World Broke Open, co-directed by a woman named Elmaya Tailfeathers and Kathleen Hepburn. And it just won a large documentary prize, and it screened last year. I saw it at the Berlin Film Festival, was the first screening of it, then went on to screen in Toronto. It then got picked up by Ava DuVernay's distribution company, and it was put onto Netflix. So it's, I'd like to focus on all aspects of the industry and just the potential and capabilities. And the thing that's already happening here is that we have these amazing storytellers, and they're telling all kinds of scale of stories, and large productions to small productions.
Wow, amazing. Let's maybe jump for a moment to one of the things I wrote down here, which was video games in the gaming industry. Is that part of this as well?
Yeah. So we, through various programs, support the digital and interactive sector. So we work very closely with the industry association, and a lot of work that we also do, which isn't just supporting the content, but the companies themselves. So companies can get grants from us to travel to trade shows or major markets. So I think next week, there's a conference in London called Pocket Gamers, where several BC video game companies are attending. And if they qualify, they would have received a grant from CreativeBC to be able to attend for business development purposes. So that's a lot of what we do with that sector, is really focused on business development and access. And we also have an interactive fund, which all kinds of projects kind of qualify within it. But it's also another, part of BC's tech story, but also the creative industry story. We always say, well, video games are where tech and creative meet. And it's, also remains a very strong sector in BC, and sometimes they do cross over some of the talent with the video or with the animation and visual effects community as well.
Okay, interesting. So there's a company that I invested for full disclosure, very small dollar amount, but years ago, into a company that's still around called Hothead Games. Okay. And they're a video game producer. Yeah. And they've actually grown quite a bit. They have quite a big team. They've got an office just before you hit kind of Stanley Park at the end of heading down Georgia Street. And here they are. These are some of their latest games. So would this company be one that is supported by CreativeBC in a way?
They might be. If they're attending one of these markets, they may have applied for a grant. So it looks like they're mobile.
They are. It's company. Mobile. That's right. Yeah.
There is a interactive and digital tax credit that's administered not through our organization, but through BC Ministry of Finance. Their company may have qualified for some of those credits. But if they are attending a major market, or there's a conference called SIGGRAPH that takes place in Vancouver every few years, they may have participated in that. Right. Where, we maybe brought in a delegation of international buyers or investors. These sectors have also participated in the BC Tech Summit over the last few years, which also brings in a lot of those Silicon Valley and type of investors, things you're far more familiar with than I am, but okay. Are they doing okay in their business?
I get their quarterly updates. So they're still a private company, but their revenues are growing. Their library of games. I mean, the challenge in the gaming industry, and this is not a comment specific to Hothead, but just in general, is that you have to always be creating something new, right? Like it's not, you can't, it's unfortunately not unlike a great movie. that could have people watching it think of like a movie like Shawshank Redemption. Like people still watch it today because it's such a great movie. Video games over time. I mean, unless you're, got a name like you've got an Atari Asteroids and you're bringing that back for nostalgic purposes. So it's a tough business for sure. But I think they're doing quite well. Yeah.
Yeah.
What else I want to ask you about here? Oh, there's a company that you sometimes see called Lionsgate.
Yes.
Is that a Vancouver company?
It started as a Vancouver company. It was started by Frank Giustra way back in the day.
Okay, yeah.
And then it eventually all moved to Los Angeles and is essentially an American company.
Okay.
They just did a great film, if you haven't seen it, called Knives Out, which has nothing to do with BC, but I know Lionsgate produced it. But it did start here. And I think it was because Frank was based here, and he was part of a group that started another company in the last few years called Thunderbird.
Thunderbird, right.
Thunderbird Pictures, and Thunderbird has certainly grown. They also, Atomic Cartoons is a branch of what they're doing. Kim's Convenience was produced by them, which is a CBC show.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's a lot of entrepreneurs live in Vancouver, as you know, in your work, and there's, you never know where the next sort of thing is. We have a really interesting production company in BC called Braun, and Braun produces, they do both animation and production, but they've also been involved in large productions as producers for Joker.
Okay, really?
They were producers on Joker, Bombshell, The Morning Show, which is another Apple show. Yeah. If you haven't heard about Braun, you will start to hear more and more about them. B-R-O-N.
B-R-O-N.
It's Brenda and Aaron together, Braun.
Yeah.
But they are an interesting company and sort of ones to watch. Yeah. And really great to see. It's not necessarily...
Do you watch a lot of movies yourself?
Well, I watch a lot on airplanes, I find, because I am traveling a fair bit. But I just saw films recently because you kind of end up over the holiday season going to actual movie theaters and seeing them. I was actually very fortunate that I was invited to a screening of the new Star Wars at ILM, Industrial Light and Magic, because they have a large visual effects facility here in Vancouver.
Okay.
And they are part of Disney, and they worked on Skywalker, the new Star Wars. Yeah. And it was really amazing to be able to watch the film with some of the creative people who worked on it.
Really?
Yeah, it was pretty cool.
Was that before it came out?
It was the day it came out, but they had a little screening, at their offices.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it was.
What a neat experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, that's just so neat. So I wanted to ask you about this. You touched on this Amplify BC. Mm-hmm. So can you explain what Amplify BC is?
Yeah. So it's it started in 2015. 2016, the provincial government at the time announced a 2-year music funding program for the BC music industry, focused on various aspects of that. And in the last 2 years, the government has renewed it on a yearly basis, and it's been $7.5 million over years, which is a lot of money, but it's over many different programs that support the economic development of the music industry, because it is a very, we've had artists like Bryan Adams and Buble and Sarah McLachlan, and they've all come out of Vancouver, and really ingesting investment into this sector to continue to not just to build artists like that, but also grow companies, management companies. We have a large label here, Network, 604 Records, but also artists that are at various levels in their careers to support them either through again, kind of touring funds that come through an organization that we give the funding to actual sound recording, to companies actually developing business plans, to hire, how do they professionally develop more managers to support the talent? So it's, and live music events. So
so what are the? Because I went through this, and there's a lot of really neat ones there. I have to tell you, there's a few I highlighted that I was quite surprised by.
Okay. I don't know every single grant off the top.
No, of course I don't. No, there's so many here. But like there's one that I found, and I randomly found this one is called where is that one? What's this guy's name? Finn Wolfhard.
Okay.
Do you know who he is?
I don't.
Have you seen that TV show? this is the second one I found.
Okay.
And he's got a rock band called Calpurna, and they received $28,000 through Royal Mountain Records.
Okay.
But this is the kid who's the head actor for what was that?
Stranger Things.
Stranger
Oh,
Things.
yes.
He got paid $250,000 per episode. Now that's a good program when you're 17 years old. But my question is like, how would a band that he started? Because I guess he's a Vancouver boy. He's from here. But like, how would a
So that probably covered some of their sound recording costs.
Oh, I see.
It's not going to that. It's to cover the costs of probably the recording, music video potentially. I'm not sure. I'd have to sort of dig into it.
Yeah.
But
so is there like there must be is there an application form?
yes.
Or something like that?
There's a very thorough applications with our music funding.
Is that online as well?
Yeah. The most of the programs are closed or about to close as we come to our fiscal year end. But no, there's a very thorough application process where you're asked to submit a lot of financial information, business plans. And then as you draw down on your grant, proof of what you've done with it.
So these are grants.
Yes, they're grants, and they're never 100% of a budget. You have to have some other funding in place as well.
Right. So for people to be clear, what a grant is it's not a loan. It's money that's
it's not recoupable,
non-recoverable.
It's it's an incentive of sorts to help trigger new business activity for you.
Right. I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, there's a few on here that I just was quite. So who kind of decides what is there a committee?
Yeah, we have a very thorough process where we have first our staff does reviews of the people who are managing the programs, and then we have an adjudication panel where we bring in people from the industry sometimes from across the country if there's too many people who have conflicts of interest locally, and that panel makes the final recommendations that ultimately come to me and our VP, and we do the final sign off.
There's pages here. I mean, there's like 10 pages. Like, are these all?
Those are the ones that got grants. There's hundreds more that didn't.
Oh, really?
So they have to review all those applications.
You must have like computer machine learning to be able to get through all this.
We had to develop a pretty strong online.
Like, do you guys max out your? You said $7.5 million a year.
Yeah, it's always oversubscribed. I mean, government type of grant programs are generally that's pretty common.
Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
I've never had a government grant in my life. I got student loans, I guess, but that was not a grant.
Yeah.
Okay. That's interesting. So this is a program that was started in 2015, and so far it's been renewed every year by the former and current BC government.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So is there any kind of when these applications are made, like that was one that really struck me because, this is a kid who's obviously extremely wealthy from his time he spent on Stranger Things, and to see him because this is taxpayer dollars, right? I mean, and so I look at that and think, well, like, does this kid who's, apparently worth $3 million, does he really need $28,000 for his rock band? I mean, like, there's probably a lot of other starving artists out there that could benefit from that $28,000 than a guy who's worth $3 million. Like, is there any kind of like a sort of, I guess, filters to say, well, like, when you become a certain level of success, like I wouldn't expect Sarah McLachlan or Brian Adams to ever get any money from something like this. I'm assuming the spirit of this is to support
it's for a range of artists. So his band may not just be him, right? And maybe it was before he was the successful TV star or whatever it is, and it's a different line of business. But there's larger bands that have applied and received funding that are sort of mid-range artists or on that upper end. So
there's no threshold to say like, hey, you're you're like you can use like Brian Adams. You've made millions. You don't need this grant money.
It doesn't exactly work that straightforward, right? We're not the judge and jury on your success or your lack of success or whatever it is. Right. It is, does it qualify within this? Where are the expenditures going?
I see.
And how many people are they employing and all of these kinds of things. Yeah. So, a band like Mariana's Trench, which people may think the same thing, but it actually hugely benefits them from maybe the type of producer they can hire.
Right on.
They can bring in and like I said, it never covers 100% of it.
Yeah.
So they have to still have the other half of the money coming from another source, whether it's their own money and they have to show it in the receipts, and it's
is there an
thorough.
accountability aspect to this? Like, do they have to provide some kind of report post receipt of the video?
Yeah, with all of our programs. All of the programs. So you don't get your final drawdown until you've submitted your final report.
Right.
And then sometimes there's a back and forth on, what does this actually mean? Can you provide this? So it's, it's a very, I like to say a lot of the work that we do is very high touch with our client base.
Yeah.
Because there is a lot of, whether it's a $5,000 grant or a $100,000 grant, they have the same amount of touch points.
Right. Yeah. Okay. There was another one that came up here that caught my attention, which is Music BC. And it was just a one-liner. It just says training and professional development, export and showcase initiatives, business travel and tour support. And it was 1.2 million.
Yeah. So Music BC is the industry association.
Okay.
So they're a membership association for BC artists. So within that, if you go to the Music BC site, you'll see the multitude of programs. So they will do, so a large part of the music industry is touring is still extremely important.
Right.
So getting people to international
You could almost argue
markets.
it's more important now, especially for these big artists, because no one wants to buy records anymore.
Well, yeah, big artists, emerging artists, mid-level artists.
Yeah.
Going to festivals, and they will go to there's a large music festival in Germany called Reeperbahn, and there'll be a BC showcase, so that if there's an opportunity within maybe a larger Canada context. So some of those international showcases are, where they will feature like these 4 or 5 BC artists, so they can be discovered by bookers who book all the nightclubs in Germany or venues in Germany or in France or wherever it is, because you want to get those bookers excited about you so that they'll put you on so then you can do a tour. Yeah. And then the touring grants actually help the artists like pay for the tour, whether it's the travel costs or whatever it is. So there's a multitude of things that they do, and and then the professional development. So it may be a program with, if you're a newer artist, how do you do proper financial management? So they may put on a workshop on something like that, or bring in an expert, or how do you manage, what are royalties, and how do you work with SOCAN, or this summer we brought in Apple Music, or they actually came into town and they had a workshop for artists to understand how do you really leverage the Apple platform for discoverability, but also how are you actually making money on it? And how can you work with an organization like Apple or a Spotify to do that? So there's a lot of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
So do podcasts qualify for this type of thing? Because I mean, we're on Spotify, we're on Apple, but I'm not singing.
No, not at this point. No. But we do support.
So audiobooks, like you have to be singing. Rapping.
So we work with the industry association, the Association of BC Book Publishers. We had an audiobook fund to help BC publishers make their books into audiobooks.
Oh, wow.
So there is that, actually. Yeah. We also supported DOXA, which is the Documentary Film Festival.
Okay.
They now do a podcast festival, which I think they just did the second one this last year, and I guess they'll probably be going to a third one. So they may have received a grant for their festival from CreativeBC to be able to bring in some podcast expert to help educate the community here on, distribution, how to sell your podcasts, et cetera, all of these kinds of things.
Yeah. Now you said this Amplify BC was started in 2016, right?
Yes.
And has it always been $7.5 million per year?
No, so 16 in 20. So from 2016 to 2018, it was 15 million over 2 years. So essentially, kind of that.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And then the last 2 fiscal years, it's been 7.5.
And assuming there must be like a board or something like this for Amplify BC that kind of, or some kind of...
Yeah, so CreativeBC has a board of directors that oversees the governance of CreativeBC and are essentially people I report to.
Yeah.
And then we have an industry advisory committee that supports the work of Amplify BC.
Yeah.
And then we have accountabilities to government, to many people. So that's sort of the structure that we work within. And we actually have industry advisory committees across sectors.
Okay. So it's been running for now, I guess, 4 years. Is there kind of has anybody ever at the board level said, okay, it's been 4 years. We've spent, I guess you could say $30 million to kind of help improve or foster the music community in BC, which is, candidly, it's a lot of money, right? $30 million over 4 years.
Yeah.
Has anybody said, okay, well, what have the results been? Have we seen because I'm assuming before this, there was nothing, right? Or was there something different?
There was very minor stuff, but so there's yearly reports that we're publishing.
Yeah.
We're just finishing an economic review that I can't share the information yet because it hasn't been shared with government yet.
Okay.
But there is, we're always sort of looking at what is the investment impact, obviously, right? So is that, and there's been a few economic reports done by the industry themselves that are available to show the impact, kind of, what it looked like before and after. And a lot of the creative industries, it is a long game, like it is, someone is working on a TV show that they're trying to create. It may take 3 or 4 years and 3 or 4 years of travel grants to go to markets to try to pitch your program, or what we call development money to develop your show so that it's ready to be sold.
Right.
So that's a lot of what across the creative industries, where a lot of the investment, it may not show in the year that the investment's been made, but the longer term and the tracking of that is what we're trying to get better at. And we really, again, try to work closely with colleagues in other provinces and territories and nationally to ensure that we're all looking at it the same way.
Yeah.
Because right now we're not exactly, but it doesn't mean anybody's right or wrong, but trying to streamline some of this data collection and analysis of it. It's not as, it hasn't been as sophisticated maybe in these sectors as others.
Right. Yeah. I imagine the other challenge is that as an entrepreneur and business person, like if I'm going to if Ross is going to start a business up for me that's going to manufacture these water bottles, and he needs $100,000 to do it, and I give it to him, it's a real simple equation. Like if he comes back with less than $100,000, it's a bad business proposition. If he comes back with $200,000, we've got a great business model. But I'm looking for him to just generate a profit. In the end, I don't really care how many bottles he produces or who he sells them to. If I'm being really simple about this.
Yeah.
Whereas this is, I guess you can't just look at let's see one here, like Lotus Audio Corporation with their chip music concert series for $5,600. You can't look at it and go, well, did we get a return on investment? Because there's no, it's more about an experience, right?
It is, but they're still reporting how many people showed up.
Oh, okay.
How many tickets did you sell?
Right. And do these
how many
people
downloads?
They have to provide that kind
all
of,
that.
Oh, I see.
So, that's what I mean. When you have such, we've had over most of our programs, like we get just for the music programs, we've had over 1,000 grants, but only like 200 or 300 actually get them, right? So it's a lot.
And how do you get through all that?
Well, it's time.
With such a small team, like that's incredible.
I mean, it's time, and it's being very structured and using your digital platform smartly.
Do you ever have to kind of almost rotate, like say, let's say Ross and I have both applied, we're both equally qualified for some kind of grant, and you say, well, sorry, Ross, last year you got a grant, so this year we're going to give it to Andrew because we just don't have, because we are always, as you described, we're always oversubscribed? Or do you just say, you know what, Ross, you're going to get half and Andrew's going to get half?
It just depends, and that's really where we use our adjudication panel specifically for the music programs, who might look at it and may have more insights on something that we don't on an artist or a company, and sort of look at it from that balanced perspective. And as you maybe will interview more people who manage government grant programs in the creative and artistic industries, they all have a similar kind of process. Because it's also, it's interesting, your water bottle example, because I always say nobody has ever made a film or a TV show thinking it's going to bomb at the box office and nobody's going to watch it, right? It's a different kind of endeavor that it's a risk, and you're going into it saying, okay, I'm going to develop these 6 projects, and which one is actually going to be the hit, and you from productions that are in the tens of millions of dollars to lower end productions, you just don't know what the hit is going to be. And it's so many different factors. And as much as maybe there's, you know, AIs and algorithms that determine some of this stuff, but at the end of the day, it's the connection that you feel to a story or a piece of music or a book that is going to make you want to continue reading it or watching a film. And that's what all of this is about, is trying to really, you know, keep feeding it, because things are going to happen. And, you know, I believe that we as society, having, you know, strong cultural and creative industries and people who have the ability to do this stuff and are encouraged to do it, you know, brings the whole economy and cultural and social and all of that stuff up in a different way, that it's an essential part of, you know, being humans.
Yeah, life isn't all about just money and dollars and cents, for sure. Yeah. You know, you make a good point, because I think about two movies right off the top of my head: Waterworld and Napoleon Dynamite. At the time that Waterworld was produced, which was Kevin Costner was the lead in that, if you remember, it was quite a few years ago now. It was the most expensive movie ever produced at the time. And it was a complete bomb. And the reason it was because, of course, this is way before CGI, and so they actually had to film it in the on water, and that's why it was so damn expensive. And it was pretty much a bomb for the amount of money it cost. By contrast, Napoleon Dynamite, which I absolutely loved. Do you remember that movie?
Yes.
Just my favorite line is, "The chickens have large talons." Anyways, that movie was produced by, I think, like just a couple of guys that were like,
400,000 was their budget.
400,000. And apparently they sold it to some production company for only like $3 million. But then that company sold it to a bigger, like
Box office was 45 million for that one.
Yeah, incredible.
Yeah, and now it's a cult classic, right? Or Moonlight, which won the Oscar a couple of years ago, right? Moonlight's budget was something like $3 million.
Really?
You know, it comes down to story, how your story is getting out there. And, you know, the film I mentioned by Maya Tailfeathers and Kathleen Hepburn, you know, because Ava DuVernay, if you don't know who she is, she directed Selma, and has a distribution company that's focused on distributing film and television content made by women or people of color or Indigenous people in a very specific focus, and getting it onto these platforms that maybe otherwise they wouldn't have access through other distributors. So it's really, all of these things become very important factors in getting your ultimate product out there at the end of the day. And which is why international markets become so important, connecting with, you know, sales agents and distributors and all of these sort of things. You know, you're not just going there. You know, I get to go to some of these international markets. I sometimes don't even see a film. I'm just in meetings, you know, supporting our talent and making those international connections. So it's a lot of hard work for people, but I think what continues to drive them is their, you know, passion for the content they're trying to make or sell or create. Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, before we wrap this up, just to summarize, so when we look at the audio, on the music industry in BC, there's no tax credits for music production. Correct. But people who are producing music can apply to Amplify BC for support. And I noticed there are different categories, like they have career development, live music, music company development. And I mean, some of them, you know, you can argue whether these are worthwhile investments or not. But like one of the ones that I saw was under music company development was used for upgrading a cashless payment system, or another one was for staffing expansion. So, and people are, you know, these range from a couple of like maybe $4,000 right up to like, there's some here that are like literally $100,000. So there's an application online for... Yeah, I think most of the programs are now closed for this fiscal year. But I'm assuming it's probably going to be here next year. We don't know yet. You don't know, yeah. But, you know, a lot of that... Where would someone find it? On the CreativeBC website, so creativebc.com. A lot of these things, you know, it may sound trivial, but if a venue can improve the sound system, they can get more talent in there. Right. And more performers, and therefore... be a busier venue, or if they improve the lighting, or add more accessibility to the facility, that brings in more audiences. Yeah. So but this is where the reporting, I guess, is very important, right? The accountability. Exactly. Have you ever had a situation where someone's received a grant and, like, quite honestly, because I got to think if you're getting thousands of applications, there's some people who are not
being good players here and are totally bogus, or they're not really using the money the way they should. Have you ever discovered that or identified where you had to recover money?
Yeah, I would say some people, I wouldn't say bogus, but I would say sometimes they weren't able to do what they received the grant for. Right. Therefore, they have to give it back.
And you've had that situation come up?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Or they just turn it down, because they're like, this, we couldn't raise the other half of the money we needed, so we can't do this project now. So that happens.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Because you were saying that they have to. Does the grant money come after they kind of have to? It's
a combination. It depends. Like there's different drawdowns, so you're not getting 100% of it at the same time, but you're reporting along the line that triggers different drawdowns. Yeah. And that if the reporting is indicating like, oh well, this were the receipts, or when did this happen, or why hasn't it happened, then that's what I mean about a high touch program. Yeah. Where you are in constant contact with the people receiving these grants and kind of understanding where they are in the process.
And every one
project.
of these has that high touch, like whether you're getting $100,000 or you're getting $4,000, there's somebody within your team that's got eyes on this. And so Ross, did you find that to amplify BC's application?
Yeah, but I think they took down the application right now, maybe potentially because it's closed for the year.
I think the program's just closed.
But this is is amplify funding programs and deadlines here.
Yeah, right. So you can see the deadlines have all passed.
Yeah, so there's no.
So when would we know whether the government's going to renew this? Like historically, when have they made that announcement? When did they announce it last year?
Sometime before the end of the fiscal year, which is the end of March.
End of March.
So,
okay. So if they're going to renew it, we would likely know by the end of March.
So. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, so that's the music side. And then on the film side, there isn't an Amplify BC fund. There's
other grant programs. There's a lot of domestic motion picture there. So we have a lot of programs that support, like I said, the development of content. So we have partnerships with people like the CBC, where we do a digital shorts program that puts funding both from CreativeBC and CBC that supports development of short form content, which is it's sort of sometimes as a filmmaker, you want to make several short films or web series that become your calling card to show that you have the ability to make a larger feature film. And the same with Telefilm Canada, or if you are working with a broadcaster like CBC or the BBC, and they say they would like you to go develop this project further, and they're willing to put in a certain dollar amount, we would match it up to a certain point. There's programs like that. And then there's also industry initiatives, which is essentially sort of like a sponsorship grant program, which across the creative industries, whether they're festivals or workshops or development opportunities, which may also receive grants from us.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the film. And then I guess the other one that I wanted to touch on too, because I just want to make sure we cover all, summarizing the cover. So you got film with the grants, music with Amplify BC. Yeah. And then you also have book publishing and the magazine.
So they also there's activities within those industries would also potentially receive travel grants.
Right, I saw that you had another program.
Yeah, it's called Passports to Markets.
Passports to Market.
And that's where the book publishing industry, as an example, a major book fair. There's major book fairs that
like
is
the
important.
Magazine Publishers Travel Support Envelope.
Yeah,
for
so that would help magazine publishers attend the National Magazine Conference in Toronto. For book publishers, there's a bit of a book publisher circuit. There's the London Book Fair. And
I noticed most of these are they all seem to average between $1,000 to $2,000, which tells me that's probably the cost of a business class, or not business, a economy class flight to wherever.
Well, it would include hotels. And it's not 100%, right?
No,
so it would only. If your ticket costs $500 and you stayed with a friend or whatever, we would only pay 50% of that.
Right.
Even if we said your grant was.
So is that the maximum? It would never exceed 50%?
No.
That's the max. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's for publishing, which includes books and magazines, and then there's the video game sector.
So within all of it, so across all of these sectors, books, magazines, digital and interactive, film, there's the industry initiatives program. Within that, they can qualify for the passports to markets if it's a market that the industry has deemed they want to go to.
I see.
And then there's grant programs for events like supporting the Podcast Festival, the Vancouver International Film Festival, or being part of the Canada Pavilion at Pocket Gamers in London. We may support the BC companies to be able to be part of that by contributing some funds towards that.
Yeah.
So that goes across all sectors.
Okay. Your operating budget's only, I think you said at the beginning of the podcast, like $2.5 million.
That's our grant from the province. Yeah.
But this here is 7.5. So you're actually having to hand out a lot of money that with such a small team. And
Yeah.
but before this existed, what would all these musicians and musical artists do? That they just didn't have as much.
Well, they were working hard. They probably had other jobs too, right? Like there were, people.
There wasn't
wearing
anything
multiple
that
hats.
replaced this. Is that right?
No.
No.
So, I mean, there was minor grant programs, and Ontario's had a large music fund for many, many years.
Oh, has it? Yeah.
So that was part of, I think the industry here. It's also the industry themselves lobbying to government for more support that they see in, that will help with a competitive advantage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And were you working at CreativeBC when they launched this Amplify BC?
Yes.
You were.
Yeah.
So but that was it was launched under the previous Liberal government.
So it was launched as the BC Music Fund and then has become Amplify BC in the last 2 years.
And what ministry does this fall? What ministry does CreativeBC?
CreativeBC is supported through the Ministry of Tourism, Arts and Culture.
And who's the minister for that?
Lisa Bear.
Lisa Bear. Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Well, Prem, this has been great.
Yeah, well, you did your research. It's great.
No, this is really neat.
Yeah.
There's so many cool. So, is there anything you want to plug here for CreativeBC for all the starving artists out there that are trying to make it in the movie or music industry that you can help?
It's a very dynamic industry. There's a lot of events that go on in the province. Like we support things that Women in Film and Television does. Or, the Motion Picture Industry Association, go connect with the unions and the guilds, or there's great programs at Cap College and UBC and the Vancouver Film School. Like there's a lot going on. If you want to work in the film and television industry in British Columbia, it's a great time to do it.
Yeah.
But as I was saying, like more broadly in the creative industries, there's a lot of crossover and a lot of linkage. There's composers that compose for film. We also, sometimes they'll bring up music supervisors who work in film and television, and they'll do a showcase of BC bands so that when they're placing music in a show, maybe they'll place the music from that artist from BC. Right. So there's a lot of this crossover stuff happening that is also really neat, and that the industry drives themselves.
Yeah. You're my first podcast of 2020. We're going to get into music festival pretty darn soon. It'll be coming quickly. I know a lot of people on my team, like Ross, love going to these kind of festivals. Are there any particular festivals that you think people should really think? I don't want to put you in the spot.
Favorites.
No, I'm not saying favorites, but are there any that are out there that maybe people should definitely think about, or don't even maybe necessarily know that much about it?
Well, the Documentary Film Festival will come up in May.
Oh, that would be neat to see.
There's also a women's film festival in early March. There's everything sort of gears down and then launches again kind of post-April. There's always something, honestly. Subscribe to our newsletter. It sort of shows you highlights of events.
Do you guys have like a calendar of events on your website?
It's not exactly a calendar, but our newsletter will. And that's not really our
on Twitter
focus.
as well.
Yeah, follow all of our social media. One thing I didn't talk about that I'll give a little plug to is that we've been leaders in leading what we call a Real Green Initiative, sustainability in the production industry in BC and in Canada.
Yeah,
and
this is really important.
We are the leading jurisdiction in Canada, I think, that have done this. We've worked closely with people in the UK at BAFTA who have developed tools where you can calculate the carbon emissions of your production. And we've licensed them for Canada through CreativeBC and encouraging other provinces to join us in this. Manitoba just signed on recently with us. But it's really a large-scale effort by the industry to become more sustainable, obviously decreasing their footprint and cost savings at the end of the day. So it's everything from having more electric vehicles. It's a highly vehicle dependent industry and,
Right.
you know, trucks and generators and all these kinds of things. And BC is the perfect jurisdiction to lead in it, where the company that supplies most of the vehicles to the industry had like, I don't know, some like 10 vehicles 2 years ago, now has increased their fleet to, I think, over 30 or 40
Wow.
to serve the industry. So there's, you know, it's also an industry that's very socially conscious and thinking about things much more broadly than just their actual work. So
Yeah.
I would give Real Green a plug because it's something we're really proud of.
Yeah, great. Well, that's excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah.
I'm hopeful that people will listen because I think this was really insightful. And I hope we get to all enjoy some nice music and more films coming from BC. So thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks, Andrew.
Prem Gill, CEO of CreativeBC. Thanks for coming on the show today. Wow, what an interesting conversation with Prem Gill, CEO of CreativeBC. Prem oversees the industries of digital media, film, TV, music, books, and magazines in BC. Their organization is an advocacy and liaison for feature films, TV series, and oversees Amplify BC, which is a fund that helps support rising artists in the music industry. Have a listen.